Okay, so we'll just start by saying a big thank you to Whitting and Riddell. I know most of you are clients of. Just thank you for putting on this program. Delighted to be partnering with them to deliver this three webinar program with the other parts of the support that you're aware of. I suppose just to make you aware, this is actually only the first program I'm going to be running. Once this is finished, we'll be running a second program called Back to Profit, which will be kicking off at the beginning of June. So there'll be some more information on that for you over the coming weeks. So. Oh, technology hit already. I can't get my computer to move forward. Bear with. We seem to be stuck. Okay, there we are. We're back. Okay, so as I said, three webinars that we're going to run over the next 3 weeks as part of this program. First one today around how we survived through this this initial phase that we're in of COVID-19. I suppose just to say, first of all, I've sent you some handouts for today, and one of those is a bit of a roadmap, so what we're calling the Survive, Adapt, Thrive roadmap. I'm not going to be going through that in any detail or even at all today, but I wanted to let you have that because I think it's got some good pointers through these different phases that you can refer to as a leader in your business. There's also on that handout some references, some courses that we recommend to help through some of those phases. So for those of you that want to jump onto the free courses we've offered, that might give you some guidance as to which ones might suit you. So just want a quick overview of what we're going to do over the next half an hour. So very much focusing around this need to survive. I'm going to talk a bit about how to manage your scenario plans. I think I'm quite aware that many people have already worked on their scenario plans, so I want to sort of focus more on how you manage those, but I will very briefly point you to some information on how to build them if you haven't, and I will quickly give you an overview of what that might look like before we talk about how you manage them. Then I want to talk about how we focus on the right things. I think there's a real challenge now that I think most people, and I think we particularly are really, really busy, and it's not necessarily busy because our companies are doing well. We're just busy trying to fight our way through this or find new ways to do things or think about what it might look like in the future. So I think it's really important to sort of decide how do we focus on those right things for us at this time and into the future. So I'm going to give you some tips and advice on that as well. And then I just want to sort of finish off today on how you need to look after yourself, but not just yourself, but your people. I think there's no doubt this is an emotionally charged time, so I think that we can't really ignore the emotional side of what's going on now, because I think that the danger with the emotional side is I think by the time we realize it, sometimes it's too late. So I want to maybe give you a bit of self-awareness around that so you can proactively manage that situation. Okay, so just before we get into those three areas, I think just probably what I'd suggest with kind of your need to survive is to be really, really conscious of where you are. I think there's a definite journey here around, you know, crisis strikes, and then we move very quickly into that need to survive and gain control. And then obviously, hopefully we come out of that, you know, with a bit of hope, and hopefully we'll get some of that hope post Sunday, and then eventually into some kind of recovery phase. I think within that, there's definitely this pivot point as we move out of that survive and control into that period of hope, which I think is really important because I think it's the point at which we can probably really start to execute on some of the things we need to do to come out of this either at all or in a better state. But I think what I'd ask you as well is to think about that in terms of your clients as well. So what you're doing with your clients or how you're communicating with your clients or how you're promoting to your clients, I think is really, really critical. I think your timing has to be spot on. If you've got clients that are still struggling to come to terms with the crisis and still struggling to take control, starting to push out stuff around, you know, promoting for the future probably is ill-timed. So I'm sure you've seen lots of stuff around, you know, businesses just trying to wrap their hands around their clients, just be there for them. I think that's the right thing to do, but there will be a pivot point. So I'd watch that for your own business, but also for your clients as well. Okay, so getting into the manage your scenario plans, again, I've also shared something with you, which is really for reading offline, but we've put together a story about Maurice Wilson, who we're calling the man without a plan. So just very quickly, the reason I shared that with you is Maurice Wilson was a decorated World War II veteran who got very, very sick after the First World War and spent some time with some Indian priests who put him on a regime of prayer, fasting and diet, which cured him of all his ills. So he became a real disciple of their teachings. He was also, as most people were after the war, very unsettled. He didn't kind of have much purpose in life. And it was kind of at that time that lots of people were trying to conquer Everest. There have been a number of failed attempts, and there are a number of new expeditions going there. So he hatched a plan that he would be the first man to climb Everest, but rather than doing it the traditional way, he would fly a plane all the way to Nepal. He'd crash land it on the slopes of Everest, and then walk up the last part of Everest alone. So both of those things were pretty crazy, particularly when you bear in mind that the man had never flown a plane before or never climbed. Now, it probably won't surprise you to hear that he died on Everest. That's kind of a testament to his, not just that it was a crazy idea, but actually, to be fair, he actually got a long way through his expedition. He actually got to Everest, which is quite incredible. And I shared the story with you because I'd like you to read it, because there's some really good stuff in there. Because what Maurice showed was incredible attitude, resilience, had a can-do attitude. He was very, very good with ambiguity. When things kind of weren't clear, he could find his way around them. And I think all those traits are really, really important at the moment. But ultimately, he didn't have a plan, or he had a poor plan. He definitely had no scenarios. So he relied really on blind faith, and blind faith is not enough to get us through this current period, and certainly not into the future. So for those, if you haven't done your disaster scenario planning, what we've done is we've done a full process recording of our process, which you can access through this YouTube link. And all these slides that you're seeing now, you'll get straight after the webinar, as well as a recording of the webinar. So don't worry if you can't write this down at this moment. But I do recommend you go through that if you haven't done your disaster scenario planning. What you'll see on that is I'm going to very deliberately quickly skip through these next few slides. We talk on that recording about framing your scenario planning around a very simple process of now, where, how. But I think also trying to get you to stop just diving into the how. I think we're all busy just trying to deal with problems and try and fix everything we can see in front of us. But it's really, really important in scenario planning to sort of stop and take some stock of where we are right now. What's really the current reality for us? Get some clarity around that, and actually reset where we need to be in the future, or where we might be in the future, and understand that gap before we start diving into our physical plans. We typically say you probably ought to be spending around 60% on the actual planning, but probably 20% working out where you really are now and where you need to be, so that your planning becomes much more focused. What we'll also talk about in that recording is just these 5 things to consider in terms of working out where you are now. So we still see lots of procrastination around immediate decisions that need to be made. So what are they? Working out what those key issues are, and maybe use some diagnostics to do that. What are the key challenges that you can easily identify? Don't go looking for the hard to find things. Most things at the moment are pretty obvious. What are those specific urgent concerns? I think specific and short term are the words there that are really critical in scenario planning at the moment. And also, where's the opportunities? I think a lot of people really struggle to sort of think of opportunities, but there is always potential out of these situations. So kind of for you, where might that be? So think about those things as well. And probably the best way just to do that exercise is just run a simple mind map. So just take those things around a mind map and just flesh it out, and just come up with as many answers as you can around those questions. We then in that recording just talk about, where you need to be, and we just talk about the need to have a real clear idea about what was your current vision before this all happened, and then just analysing what's the actual impact on this disaster, and then the need to sort of work out what your 3 scenarios. Now, we did ask you some questions before you joined this webinar about what your scenarios were. But there's no hard and fast rules about how you fix your scenarios, whether you call them light, medium, heavy, or they're short, medium, long term, low severity, medium severity, high severity. The key thing is just to work out 3 scenarios that kind of make sense for your business. And we have businesses that we're working with currently that have gone from tens of millions to 0 revenue in a matter of weeks. For them, it's just the severity is just, it is what it is. For them, their scenarios around time. So how long does this actually go on for? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? So set your 3 scenarios out. And again, if you're struggling to kind of consider everything, maybe something like a PESTEL analysis, which is political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. Think around those kind of 6 things that might help you to flush out the key factors around those different scenarios. So I deliberately went through them very, very quickly because they're all on the recording. But then, and this is probably for those even that have already done their scenario planning, the key is once you've got those 3 scenarios is, before you do anything else, is to write down what assumptions you're making. Now, lots of us are talking about uncertainty and ambiguity at the moment, and there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is we can make some assumptions on our scenarios based on what we know now, or what we think will happen. And it's really important to write those down, because obviously what we will learn as time moves forward is, do those assumptions play out or do they change? And we need to be able to flex and change and adapt them as we learn and we move forward. Then what we can do is move into the how, which again, I'm going to skip through quite quickly because it's on the recording, but get down to sort of those key issues you need to do for the next day, 7 days and 30 days, probably 30 days max, and ask yourself the question, if this escalates, what will we do? You definitely need to think about risk. So where are the risks? There's a number of people on the webinar that have worked with us that, you know, we use tools like FMEA, use those kind of tools to help you work out risk. Think about waste. You know, what do we need to remove from the business and from where? Again, use profit and waste tools. And as I said, there's always opportunities. So have a think about, you know, where are those growth opportunities? It may even be diversification opportunities, and think about, you know, what you might need to be doing on those now to be in a good position to move out of this situation either in a survived place or in a better place. Some of those tools that at the bottom there, the waste tools and the growth tools, we're going to do in the second series in June. So we'll better go into more detail on those things when we get to that point. Okay. So what you can do from that then obviously is just list your actions against your scenarios. And I recommend you kind of have these written up in this way, because you need to be able to flex and adapt them continually. And I'm going to talk about that in a second as we move into managing your scenario plans. So I think the first thing about managing your plans is actually documentation. So it's really, really important to get stuff written down. And I would say the objective here is probably to collect the core actions into a clear one-page plan for the next 30 days, with the idea that can be repeated thereafter. If you're not reviewing your scenario plans at least once a month, and that's for me probably too long at the moment, you know, you're really not on top of it. I've done some scenario planning with clients, you know, where we've done really great pieces of work and put together really solid plans and documented. And I've asked a question 6 weeks later, kind of, you know, where are you with scenario plans? Have you reviewed them? How have they changed? And they kind of haven't looked at them since we first wrote them, which is for me is really, really dangerous at the moment. I think you're going to need to ask yourself as well, is the plan capable of success under each of the 3 scenarios? So, you know, if we were in a counselling situation where we were a bit distressed personally, you know, we'd work out with our counsellor all the things we needed to do to get where we wanted to be, and then before we left the room, they'd stop us in our chair and go, well, before you go, tell me what's going to stop you doing this. And I think that's a really, really important question to ask at the moment as businesses, because we can create some great plans, but actually we need to pre-think about the barriers to success and think about adding some of those into our plan so we can overcome them. And again, in webinar 3, in 3 weeks' time, we are going to talk about a change success model, which will help you overcome some of that stuff as well. Okay, as I said, make sure you can keep the plan current at all times. For me, it will almost certainly need weekly reviews, and for some businesses, depending on what you do, you may even need some daily reviews. And we need to make sure we communicate the plan to all. I think the more people you can involve in your plan, or certainly knowing about your plan, the more chance you've got of success. It's really hard to do this all on your own. And again, depending on your business, you may want some objectives and key results, KPIs, you know, some real measurables, so you can get some real accountability around the actions. You know, we can't afford to get 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road with our plans and find out that people haven't done what they said they were going to do. So a bit of measurement might help with that. And I think this is probably where, you know, again, we'll expand on this in the second webinar, but, you know, be prepared to pivot. You know, many of us in our businesses, and us included, have had to really be challenged on whether our model was really robust enough. So use this opportunity to think about, you know, what are we learning about our own business model, and, you know, actually, are we learning we need to pivot and actually adapt and do something different as we come out of the other side? And I think finally, in terms of kind of managing this plan, is make sure you lock in the accountability loops between you and a trusted advisor. So if you know, we've got a number of directors on the webinar, you know, for you, who is your trusted advisor? You know, use them to hold you accountable and create some loops for that. You know, for those that are less senior on the webinar, you know, use your boss as someone to really hold you to account to getting these things done, because we can't let these plans drift on. I think the other thing about managing your plans as well is a real, you know, this is an old school thing, but I think it's really, really prevalent now. There's a reason why we're in war, we have rooms, because when we're in crisis, we really need to keep everything alive in the moment. So I think it's a really powerful thing if you can to create your own war room. Now you can do them virtually, but I think even better, you know, physically, if you've still got areas where, you know, you are working together, if you can put rooms aside where you can keep all your plans on the walls, you can keep all your workings on the walls. I think it creates a really powerful message, but also keeps everything alive and makes everything much more easier to adapt. Really interesting insight with one client where we did a war room a few weeks back, and what we actually saw was people, because the war room existed, people from the business were proactively coming forward into the room to offer advice and help that probably wouldn't have said anything otherwise. So I think some kind of war room is a really powerful tool to use in managing your plans. So I talked about locking in accountability, and probably this is something we would recommend in business at any time, but definitely at these times, what is your discipline and focus around the accountability rhythm and rigor, as we call it. So weekly updates, almost certainly, I would definitely recommend a monthly review. And I think for many businesses, daily huddles for some businesses are normal, but for many businesses, they're not necessary because of the type of business that we're in. But I'm finding that businesses that wouldn't normally need to get together once a day for short, sharp catch-ups are finding that really, really useful at the moment, particularly if you're all very virtual. So I definitely, definitely get your weekly updates in, definitely get your monthly reviews in, and just, even if it's just for the short term, maybe those daily huddles will be a good way just to keep the momentum and keep everybody focused on the objectives ahead. I think the other thing I'd say with this as well is as we move through this, that kind of usual quarterly strategic momentum that you might think about in normal trading times, and and annually resetting yourself strategically, try and get back to that as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're going to get very quickly into a habitual situation of just being very tactical and reacting to everything in front of you. And the quicker you can get back to being strategic, the quicker you'll probably move in a much more positive direction. And I think just some final thoughts on managing your plan. There's definitely a question about deciding who will be involved. As I said, I think very important to get as many people involved as possible, and certainly as many people aware of what's going on as possible. But there are, again, depending on your business and the severity of what you need to do, there's a real case here for creating specialist teams. COVID, almost like COVID-19 task force. I think they're really powerful because not only do they give real focus into the current project in front of you, but I think also gives you an opportunity to bring together teams that are multi-level and multidiscipline. Whereas rather than just having a board of leaders or a board of directors, you can actually start to create a team from different parts and different levels of the business, which I think is powerful. I think there's definitely, for me, just do it. I still see huge procrastination in doing this at all, and for those that have done it, keeping on it, which I think is going to be the key. As I said, make sure you review the plan weekly, but the key is be prepared to adapt and refine. It's not just about reviewing and being static on the plan you first wrote. It's really important to go, what's happened and what have we learned, and what of our assumptions have been challenged, and what do we need to adapt and what do we need to refine now as a consequence. As I said, put those daily huddles in if necessary, and really, and be really, really key in setting a time and a place and a format for those catch-ups. Don't just say, we'll have a weekly catch-up. Get them in a diary, get them in at fixed times and get them booked in. And ultimately, I think you just need to remember, if you want to prosper long-term, you have to survive first. So, it's really, really hard to prosper long-term if you haven't done this survival stuff. So make sure you get on this. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure I give plenty of time at the end for some questions. I just want to move forward to focusing on the right things. And one of the things we want to do in these webinars is give you some practical tools to help you in these situations. So I think 2 tools I want to give you on focus here is this need to look for the root causes. So again, in the panic and the crisis we're in, it's really, really easy to see a problem in front of you and just start to deal with it. But very often the symptom that you see in front of you, you start working on it, isn't the root cause. So great tool just to start to sort of challenge that is the 5 whys. So when you're starting to look at problems in front of you, or you're having problems brought to you by your team, just go through an exercise of asking why we need to deal with that. There's some psychology behind this. So the psychology is to get to the truth of anything, you have to ask why at least 5 times. And I probably can tell you that very often it's more than that. And if any of you have got children, you already know how this works. Next time they ask for an ice cream and you say no, just remember the 5 whys. So this is just a simple example to show you how it works. Someone comes to me and says, why are our sales dropping? And I say, well, our salespeople struggle to sell. And that person said to me, well, why don't they sell effectively? And I go, well, because they've not been trained. And they go, well, why haven't they been trained? They go, well, because we haven't agreed a methodology or process for selling. And I go, well, why haven't we agreed a process? And they go, well, because it's never been defined. And I go, well, why has it never been defined? And I go, well, actually, we're too much of a comfort zone as a business to fix it. So what you can see from that is we could just deal with the fact that our salespeople are not good enough and that they're not trained. But if we actually dig through the conversation, and the real problem is the business is in a comfort zone. So actually what I need to fix is the fact that business isn't hungry enough to grow in sales. And I think just to give you a real life example of this, we did this with a group of engineers a little while ago, and we got them to do it on their personal situation. And one of the engineers, we asked him what they were really passionate about, and his passion was rugby. But after whying him on his passion for rugby about probably 6, 7, 8 times, the final why was because it was the only thing that gave him an emotional connection with his father. So you can see that, you know, we can go, I really like rugby because, you know, I just like the thrill of the sport, to actually, it gives me an emotional connection with my father. Those two things are really, really a million miles away. And that's what happens with the problems in your business. You can be fixing those symptoms that can be a million miles away from what the real root cause is. The second thing I want to share with you, and this is a handout I've given you as well, is just this kind of discipline around issue ranking. So as you're kind of writing down all your issues, and people are chucking issues at you, I think it's really powerful to go through this exercise where you just start to just log them in a bit of a table like this. Okay, and these are just random things I've put in, so don't think these are the things you need to put in, but you know, just start to list all those issues in a table, and then to start to ask yourself, if my issue was cash or staff morale, opportunity to improve. So how bad, so let's use staff morale as an example. How bad is staff morale now? Because unless it's completely terrible, the opportunity to improve isn't 10. So maybe we say, well, it's kind of 50-50. It's good with some people, not so good with others. So maybe it's only the opportunity to improve there is 5 out of 10. And then the second thing is well, let's imagine we actually fix staff morale. So let's just assume that we put it right and we got it to exactly where we needed it to be. How much would that support the profit and growth of this business? So that just gives you a bit of a tangible measure, those two things, about how big is the opportunity to improve, and if we actually fixed it, how much difference would it make? And then you can start to then just off the end of that, I'm just going to click through these animations. These are a bit slow, apologies for that. But what you can do is just get a bit more of an objective conversation around how big is the opportunity, how much of a difference would it make to our business, but more importantly, now, which are the biggest ones? So, obviously what you do with this is really straightforward. You just do a bit of a score. So, you see as you go through these. The only thing I'd say is once you've scored them, don't disregard it and just go for the thing you think is the biggest thing. So do be led by these scores, but you might think actually there's one there that's the second biggest score, and actually in reality that's the most practical one to tackle. So put a bit of common sense around it. This is just to give you a guide. But the idea is to take those 1, 2, 3 biggest issues based on your scoring, and then just decide what action you're going to take on them. So my recommendation with this is you take the handout I've given you and just maybe run this with yourself, but ideally with your team, and really start to get some objectivity around, the issues you have, but actually what are the big ones and what should we focus on first? Okay, I think the other thing I just want to say on issues as well and focus on the right things is that, absolutely not all issues are COVID-19 issues. And in fact, many issues are just, I think, being put under the microscope because they were there before, but under COVID-19, they can't be hidden. So don't avoid those issues that were there before just because they're not COVID-19 issues. I think this is a great opportunity to start to be really honest about the issues you have, that actually, now that we're in this situation, they've just been highlighted and have just been concentrated, and there's now no hiding from them. So don't brush those under the carpet. Okay, so just to finish off before we go to some questions, and I said, it's really, really important that we look after ourselves, but also our people. This is an emotional time. The slide I showed at the beginning of this webinar, just around, kind of the journey we're on. I think there's also a part of this journey that, as well as the pivot point we talked about, we need to be really aware that, as we go through these phases, business people are feeling uncertain, exhausted, and through that, their mindset can be one of devastation. Lots of people are suffering from loss of purpose. Now, clearly, as we come through the pivot, people, will get a ray of light. They might start to feel a bit better, and hopefully as we see the opportunity again, as we start to recover, people become more energized. Now, again, on this, I think really, really important that you think about not just where your clients are practically, but where they are emotionally. But I also am saying to business leaders, think about where your people are, because I've got lots of business leaders that are definitely in that ray of light, we're going to be okay, and are really planning for the future. But I look behind them and their teams are still, exhausted, massive loss of purpose, struggling to motivate themselves. So I think really, really important that you think about, where are your people on this journey and where are your clients, and obviously adapt accordingly. And if you're a leader, I think there's a good chance you'll be further ahead than them. So you might need to go back and mop them up and help them through. Okay, and this is without spending hours on the psychology, which I'd love to do, but so this is short and sharp. But I think there's a really thank you for, I think pretty much everyone gave me their emotional kind of state at the moment, which I really appreciate, and particularly as it was it wasn't compulsory to join the webinar. But there are clearly lots of people in uncertain, anxious states. Lots of people, you know, in a good place as well. But it's not surprising. I just thought I'd give you this kind of model just to think about, which is, I think when you are anxious, you're kind of living in the future. So if we're anxious, we're kind of worrying what may or may not happen. But of course, we have no point of reference of whether that will be true or not. We're just, you know, we're surmising. When we're in the past, we tend to be sort of looking back woefully at kind of what's happened. So we're kind of almost in a bit of a depressed state. And of course, what we really want to be is kind of living in the present, because when we're in the present, we're being mindful and we're kind of focused on what we know and what we can do now. And that's a much more positive place to be as a leader. So I think just from self-awareness, just kind of ask yourself, am I, you know, living in the future, anxious and worrying about what may or may not happen, which, you know, I understand, but isn't really helping you very much. Am I wallowing on the past and feeling a little bit depressed? You know, and can you pull yourself into focusing on, you know, where you are now, what's happening now, and what you can control and what you can do now? And that's a much better place to be. But I think that just on that as well, you know, be careful you don't mix up mindful with having your mind full. You know, having your mind full is not being mindful. Mindful is being, you know, in the moment. Having your mind full just means you've got too much going on. And I'd probably suggest then you go back to your issues and start to really focus on what are the important things you need to be working on. And I think I just dropped this slide in this morning because I was just kind of reviewing people's registrations, and there's a great article in the Harvard Review it was 23rd of March now, by Scott Uranato, and this is a piece of work that's very well known, but it's all around the 6 stages of grief, and the whole article, and I recommend you read it, and again I've given you the link to do so, is around how many people are almost going through a grief journey through COVID-19. A great article. Even the bargaining piece, you know, is talking about, you know, people are kind of going, okay, you're not letting me out of my house, but you're bargaining with me on the basis that if I stay in for 2 weeks, I'll then be free to go and do things, you know, thereafter. So, but, you know, there's lots of people angry. There's a number of people in this webinar that are definitely in that angry place. And again, I can't spend a huge amount of time talking you through this, but I think it's just read that article. And I think it's just, if we were doing this on grief, it would be these stages are necessary stages to pass through it, to overcome grief. So it's kind of okay and normal to go through these stages. So that's probably the lesson from this. And just that awareness for most people is massively helpful. But I just wanted to sort of focus on the 6th stage, which actually is a fairly new stage to grief that's been added, is that finding meaning. I'm finding one of the biggest challenges for people at the moment is a loss of purpose. I think, if I'm honest, I think it's because many people don't have a clear sense of purpose generally day to day. And again, I think this has just put a microscope on that and concentrated that feeling for people. So I think, again, be very aware that I think lots of people are finding kind of that, you know, why am I here? What's it all about? What's the point? Lots of people, you know, demotivated sitting at home. So I think really important to be aware of that part of that grief cycle. Okay, so as I said, I didn't want to do all the talking today. Just to kind of quickly summarize that, I think key is manage your scenario plans and do them if you haven't, and if you have, keep reviewing and refine them as you go. I think that's the critical thing. I think lots of people said to me, yeah, we're all over our scenario plans, but they're kind of almost doing a draw. It's kind of, they're no good in a draw. The world's changing on a daily basis, and it will change again on Sunday, I'm sure. So make sure you keep refining and reviewing those. Make sure you focus on the right things by getting to that root cause, and use that issue log to get some kind of focus on the big things. None of us can focus on or handle all the issues. All we can do is sort of pick up the biggest ones and tackle those first. And that last message there, just look after yourself, but be aware of where your people are as well, and make sure we're mindful and not mindful. So I'm gonna open it up to questions now. Just before I do that, I just wanted to say, in terms of added learning, everybody's got access to 2 free courses, which are all online. They're what I call bite-sized, so they're all driven around sort of short 3-4 minute videos with a worksheet. So they're really digestible. And I recommend those if you want to do a bit of added learning in this time. Your support coach at WR is here for you. So any questions post this webinar and the following webinars, make sure you speak to them. But I'm here as well, so happy for you to email me with any questions or any additional insight you want from the things we've started to put on your agenda today. And I would, on that basis, just reflect on these materials. We're going to send out this webinar again. We're going to send out the slides. You have the handouts. Take a bit of time to reflect, and that might generate some questions to help you sort of move through your next phases. So with that in mind, I'm going to open up to questions now. I'm going to stop sharing so I can control the webinar a little bit better now. Yeah, so I'm into questions. So if you want, if the I'm not sure if I can't see the hand raise. If the hand raise is there, feel free to raise your hand and then I can unmute you. Or if you haven't got hand raise, drop any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A, and I'll take those as they come through. Happy to, because I'm conscious that we went through quite a lot of content quite quickly. So again, happy, any questions around clarity around any of those points, feel free to drop that in as well. Okay, I've got a raised hand, so so I'm going to release Mark Newell to talk. Can you hear me, Mark? Can we hear you? Need to make sure you're unmuted, Mark. Okay. Okay, I can't hear Mark. I'm going to ask Jonathan if he'd like to talk. Jonathan, are you? Okay, so I've unmuted Jonathan and Mark. Can either of you hear me? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, who am I talking to?
John Pither.
John, you got a question?
Yeah, I think for us, we work as a private provider into the public sector, and I think a lot of the frustration that we have had is the indecision and people who should be making decisions not making decisions. And I think trying to drive, it's not so much change, but actually the whole system wasn't actually prepared for this. Nobody was prepared for it. I don't think anybody had it in their business continuity plan. I think we were quite lucky in the way that we managed to react, but we're still left with this sort of lingering scenario that a lot of the organisations that we work with are unable to make a decision or won't make a decision, and blaming it on their interpretation of guidance from NHS England, for example, and it just it leaves you nowhere to go, and that adds more to the frustration and that anger that sort of you work with them for years. And I don't know how or what the tool is to get these people to sit up, listen, understand, and act appropriately, because doing nothing doesn't help anybody.
No, it doesn't. No, absolutely. It's a tricky one, Jonathan. I think in the space you're in, I mean, ultimately, what you want to do is influence them to make a decision. And I think, if I'm honest, there's probably a question that says, is that even possible? Or if it is possible, in what time frame? I know it's not going to help you, but I think probably if I was in your situation, I'd probably would work in my scenario plans around timescales based on them actually making those decisions, so you can unlock your business. I think that's probably the only thing I think is practical, because for you, you're right. I mean, they're probably all sitting there waiting for government lead and scared to make a decision before things have been given clarity. But even in our business, we've got our three scenarios are based on 3, 6, and 12 months of no revenue. Now, we're not at no revenue now. We're not even close to no revenue, but we've kind of basically said, look, let's assume that everyone stopped for 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. What does our world look like? And I think probably you might need a similar kind of scenario plan, which just says, look, let's assume we don't get our decisions for 3 months. What does our plan look like? 6 months? I mean, I don't think it'd be that long for you, but whatever's relevant for you. As I said, kind of how you define your scenarios. But I think that's probably the only way you can tackle it. Then I think outside of that, I would do that first, because you may not be able to affect those decisions being made. But outside of that, I would be brainstorming. What can we do to get closer to these people? Are there any ways that we can influence, if you can at all? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's largely what we've done. We've worked on the worst case scenario for us being nothing for 4 months, and we're ahead of that curve already. I mean, we're sort of revising things almost on a daily basis. But it's challenging.
It is challenging, and I think then in terms of how you're feeling about that, and the anger that comes with that you mentioned, I think that's almost a personal journey for you, really. I think, and I think that I'd probably refer you back to the grief model. I think you're probably, as many people are on that journey. But I think there's lots of things. There's lots of things about we'll talk about it in the next webinar. Lessons learned. As this taught us, maybe that our model might need to be a bit slightly different in the future. So we, not that we want to have this again, but if we did have a big situation, there's definitely some lessons learned from you out of this. Once you get past that angry stage, you might not be ready for that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question. I'm just going to, Mark, can you hear me, or are you still silent? I think we've lost Mark, unfortunately. I'm going to give Russell the floor, if that's okay, Russell.
Hi, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Russell.
Oh, great. That's fine. Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm a director of a small business of estate agents and letting agents and surveyors,
Okay.
Samuel Wood. Our, I suppose, angst at the moment is that we're following government guidelines by the absolute letter. We're not allowing people to view properties. We're not providing real-time valuations of clients' houses because obviously we're trying to stop the virus spread.
Yeah.
Some of our competitors are ignoring that, and they're just going ahead as business as normal to a certain degree. Makes us cross, obviously, because we're trying to play by the rules. Now, the latest guidance from our professional body is that we should be whistleblowing and police action. That doesn't feel right either. So, just your view, really, please. Somebody outside our sector. Yeah, so.
Depends on. Yeah, no, I think it depends on your moral compass, doesn't it? Really. I mean, I'm not. There's probably a couple of ways to answer that question. I think there's a few things that spring to mind. I think there are people in your space. I've got a couple of clients actually that are in property-related businesses, and I've seen, without breaking the rules, I've seen some real good creativity. So using technology. So I've seen almost like people doing virtual tours of houses and all that kind of stuff. So I'm in my house. So I think there's definitely a before we talk about the morality of what others are doing, can you be more creative? If people are demanding they still want the services, can we do it more creatively without breaking the rules? I think there's a question there for you. I think there's I don't know. I think you have to look at your moral. I mean, morally, these people, if they are breaking the rules, then I kind of think probably there should be some whistleblowing. I mean, whistleblowing exists in the world. I remember when I worked in the corporate world, I had to sign contracts that said I actually absolutely would whistleblow if things like this happened. So I've been almost forced legally to whistleblow in the past. So I think that the view is that whistleblowing is the right thing to do when people break the rules. So if they're breaking the rules, then maybe something should be said. I think the last thing I'd say though as well, I think there's a bit around, I've talked a lot over the last few weeks around how will we be remembered after this. And I think there's lots of businesses that won't be, and I think other than
your moral reputation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can be doing things that will make you well remembered after this. And you could be doing some PR around. Maybe we're not doing everything you want us to do at the minute, but we're doing the right thing. So there's some PR maybe around that you can do.
Our sector doesn't enjoy the best reputation anyway, to be fair. So so it's I don't expect you to answer the question. It's just I wanted your viewpoint from somebody outside the sector. It's a tricky one.
And hopefully that was an opinion for you.
No, so thank you, Jason. Second part to the question as well, if I may. Obviously, a lot of the staff, and we've done our very best to keep everybody motivated and so on and so forth. Lots of them are quite enjoying home working. And I can see requests coming in saying, please, could we renegotiate how we work?
Yeah.
So again, is that something we should be, as part of our new way of looking at life? Is that something you would promote?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think I changed the language slightly. I think there's a couple of things on that as well. First, I think agile working, which
thank you.
I think is absolutely the way forward. I think you get more productivity. You get more goodwill from your staff. There's the whole stuff on Agile that, you know, I can share with you another day. But yeah, Agile working, you should. And as part of that, people get to choose when and how they work, as long as they get the job done. It's kind of the basic principle of that. But every piece of research tells you, once you get over the trust issue of the leaders, which is obviously us, that you get more from your staff, and you have more engaged staff, and you have more productivity, all that stuff. So absolutely, you should be exploring that. But I think my watch on that is, I think that not everybody enjoys working at home forever. And I think lots of people have enjoyed it in the short term, and it's been a bit of a novelty and the sun's been shining, but not everyone works well on their own. Some people love it, some people don't like it. And I think some people that like it at the moment might not like it in the long run. So I think there's a bit of a watch of what's the real impact for people over the long term, if that makes sense.
That's a lot of sense. Thank you, Jason. Sorry to hog the floor.
Okay, no, pleasure.
Thank you.
I'll
thank you.
A couple more questions coming in, which is good. So I've got Alice. Oh, I'm just going to open the floor to you, Alice. I think I've opened the floor to you, Alice. Yeah. Can you hear me, Alice? No, I've not. Can you hear me, Alice? Can you hear me, Alice?
Hi. Do you mean myself, Anya?
Anya, yeah. I've opened you as well, Anya, because I couldn't hear Alice. So you were next in the queue. So carry on, because Alice has gone quiet.
Yeah, it was more of really a response to what Russell was saying. I'm come from the IT sector, and home working is absolutely second nature to us. And it's just something to bear in mind that if home working is new for any arena, people just, this might be stating the obvious, but people need to be aware of the security concerns around the IT connectivity, obviously as well in line with GDPR and personal data that can be residing at people's homes. So whilst home working, I think, is an absolute positive that will come out of this scenario, the network security just needs to be borne in mind before companies go that route if they're not used to it. So just a pointer, really.
Great point. No, I appreciate that, Anya, because you're absolutely right. I'd widen that again. So when you're talking full Agile as well, you know, people choose to work in coffee shops and all sorts of public places. And I think there's the same, but some different. I think you agree. There's other challenges there, isn't there, around security of networks, etc. And you're right. When we've worked with clients on Agile projects, there's one of the key factors you need to get it right is around IT. So I think it's a really good point to raise. Thank you for that. Okay, Alice, can you hear me? Are you still quiet? Alice, are you there, or are you? No. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Paul now. So we've got Paul Brewer. A question. Paul, can you hear me, Paul?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm a micro entity. I'm a 3D printer supplier. I supply 3D printers across the UK and have supplied companies as varied as ASOS and GE Aviation. Coming into this pandemic, we've seen a 30% drop in, I say we, it's me, it's just me, a 30% drop in revenue as people just weren't available to make decisions. Now they are, and some of the larger corporations like the motor industry, they are back, but they're still not producing cars or whatever, and they're not around to make decisions. And a lot of what you've covered today is quite high level for somebody of my size as a business, in terms of all the theories, right? But I've got no one to bounce off at all.
Yeah.
And I've got no one to check on me whether I'm all right, really.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with acting tactically and strategically. The manufacturer that I represent is making a lot of moves there. I mean, during this pandemic, they've actually come up with a 30% support package for businesses that want to maintain their design and manufacturing, additive manufacturing capabilities, especially if they're producing ventilators or PPE or whatever. And that's all great, but just can't get hold of anyone.
Yeah.
So I just find that tactically I can make decisions, not a problem there. maybe not going through all the steps that you've outlined today. And strategically, I think my manufacturer will take a lead on that. I think I need to build up a network to be able to bounce ideas off that's kind of outside the industry.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things in there. I think in terms of what I went through today, I think that, if I'm honest, any difference between someone like you doing it and maybe someone like Helen, who's the managing partner of WR, doing it, is she would do it in a slightly more formal, way with a group of people. To be honest, if you're doing it on your own in your notebook, it's no different. The formality falls out of it, but the process is the same. So I would recommend you try and put some of that rigor into your own thinking, if that makes sense. That said, it's hard to do it on your own. I do agree with that. So I think you're right, having a.
It's just getting those contradictory ideas. Tactically or strategically, I could have one idea that could be completely wrong direction, and I want to be moving in the right direction. Especially for new opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I totally agree. And for that exact reason, there's a couple of one of the things we're going to be instigating off the back of this program is some peer groups within that WR are going to host. So one's called the Director Circle, which is typically, if I'm honest, directors sort of 5 million businesses plus. But one circle, there'll be another circle that is more for I would call more owner managed or more one man band type businesses. So it'll be the same principle. But the idea is just to get those people together, so they can, in a facilitated way, share those challenges and thoughts with each other and help each other. I think there's I'm a big fan of peer networks and peer groups. I think they're much more useful than networking events to really do exactly what you said, because it is difficult on your own. And there'll be someone else that, you'll chuck a challenge into someone else and then, oh yeah, we've had that kind of challenge. In every industry have the same challenges, but they might tackle it differently and have a different perspective to you. So I think there's a real power in getting those groups together. So we will be doing something on that after this program's finished. So we'll give everyone a heads up on that in the next few weeks. In the meantime, though, part of being on this program is, you've got your Coach at WR, use them. And again, if you want to bounce anything off me, send it to me. The whole point of doing this over the next sort of 6 weeks is just giving everyone a bit of a helping hand through a very difficult time. So we're all here to help you in the short term.
Thanks very much. It sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm conscious we've gone over time, but I'm happy if there is any other questions, if people want to raise their hand or drop anything in the chat, I'm happy to stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes if people want to do that. I'll just double check, see if Alice can actually hear me now. She's still there with her hand up, but can't seem to get a sound on. So I'll just give it another minute or so in case there's any other questions. Okay, I've got one here. So I'm just gonna, so I've got Helen Spencer. Okay, I think hopefully, Helen, we should better hear you now. Can you hear us, Helen? Are you there, Helen? Helen? I can hear you. I can hear you in the background, but I can't hear your voice.
Sorry, Jason. Oh, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm not a Helen.
Okay.
My apologies. I'm a John. I actually had difficulty connecting with it at the beginning, so apologies for that. I think Helen Spencer is actually somebody within your company who actually then sent me the new link. So
okay.
That's probably what. So that's why we've got a slight delay on the talking. Yeah, right. I mean, my particular one, I actually come from the third sector, the charity sector, and it's the point over, we're hearing a lot of, particularly the links I have with local authorities and other organisations about recovery plans. Now, for me, recovery plan almost implies to get back to where we were before. Yeah. And I think myself and obviously lots of businesses as well, we know that, we're heading for a new tomorrow rather than the past yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, it's around how do we actually start changing people's mindsets to move away from recovery plan in terms of the past and actually reshape the whole modeling and thinking going forward, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I suppose probably what we're going to talk about next week is, I think, exactly that needs to, depending on your organization and your cities, most businesses, I think, are going to need to do some kind of adaptation to their model. I think some businesses are going to need to completely pivot to something possibly even completely different. So I think you're right. I think it's almost like you need a process of almost reimagining your business or your charity. So what you asking me, is that something you should do, or how to do that, or what's the question?
Yeah, I think it's more to do, the sort of pathway, because obviously it's an awful lot to do with mindset change, both internally within your own organization, and then also when you're actually reliant on working in partnership with others, whether that be commercial partnership or a service provider partnership, isn't it? It's around finding people who are actually going in the same direction, and rather as opposed to looking backwards. And I think that will be quite interesting in the new relationships and new partnerships may actually develop as a consequence, because if some people are looking backwards all the time, then you have to ask yourself, do you really want to be involved with that business or that particular partnership? Is there any real value for you going forward, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I bring a charity group together in Birmingham, and we had a conversation. This is pre-COVID, but I think it's very relevant now. What you just asked is, a lot of them, because of their funding, get drawn off purpose and off cause and off mission. And so, we've had some big conversations about, reminding ourselves, why are we here? What do we want to achieve in the world? Why does our charity exist? What's our mission? What's our purpose? And that's created some interesting conversations about, who they do and don't want to fund them, or where they should and shouldn't look for money. And I think there's a bit of that here post-COVID. I think it's almost looking forward and going, actually, what is our current mission and why are we here? And actually, does that even fit post-COVID, or does that need to be reset? And I think that's probably the place you need to start as the leader. It's kind of, what does our mission and vision look like in the future? Does our purpose need some adjustment? And then backfill that with, how would we fund that, and how do we get our people on side? I think if you start with getting people on side, I think what you get them on side too, because their only point of reference is what you've done before. So I think you kind of need to reshape some kind of direction for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does make sense, and I think we're certainly anticipating in the voluntary sector that there'll be certain organisations that actually what they need is palliative care, because they've run their course. Potentially some within the business world, again, that's going to be the same, isn't it? It might be too difficult for some businesses to totally refocus and reshape. So it might well be a case of, well, actually we genuinely need to pull the drawbridge up and build a new structure of some kinds on something else to meet the new demands.
Absolutely, I think that's right. And it can be done. We worked with a business in Australia in the GFC in 2008, and they were a £50 million business. And post GFC, they completely repositioned their business into a completely different market, and they're now a £50 million business doing nothing like they were doing 10 years ago. So it can be done. And I think some people have got to think like that. But the quicker you think about it, the quicker you can move. That's the thing. I think if we sit waiting, hoping things will get better, I think we might be in trouble. Thanks, John. Good question.
Cheers.
I'm going to take one more question because Vicky's got her hand up, so I'm just going to ask Vicky to speak.
Hi, Jason.
How you doing, Vicky?
Hi, thanks for the session today. Just a quick one.
Pleasure.
I really like the idea of the kind of COVID task team. I'm one of 4 directors at a company that delivers e-learning solutions, and we've been very kind of proactive in our approach and always trying to stay ahead of the game where we can. One thing we haven't done yet is obviously we haven't opened it up to the kind of wider organisation yet, just because it's so uncertain and we don't want to panic people. We want to give people as much certainty as possible as we can, and we want to obviously show that we are strong in our position as directors and we have control of the situation. But I really like the idea of the COVID task team, but what I would really like to understand is, from your experience, what and your clients, what do their COVID task teams look like? So are they just directors? Are they directors of management? And kind of what involvement do they have? So are they instrumental in making business decisions, or are they there to kind of input?
So I have to say, the ones that I'm aware of my clients and ones I've seen elsewhere, they are almost, I can't think of any that are just directors. So they're typically, there's usually a representation. So I think they all have the CEO or MD, managing partner, on them, and probably another director or two. But then they have, I think common themes are somebody kind of representing the people, somebody from technology, somebody from operations. So they're kind of a blend. But very often when you get to those kind of IT or operations, they're not the directors. And I think that's really powerful. They nearly in all cases, or certainly where they're working, will have autonomy to go away and work on the challenges and put the plans together. And I think probably if big decisions need to be, if they need to do things that are going to make a big impact on the business or are going to cost money, they're bringing it back for approval. But on the basis the MD is sitting in the group, that isn't really a big challenge, because the MD is kind of not letting them run wild. So I do think you need that senior leadership. I think also as well, if the MD's in there, it kind of says this is serious, if that makes sense.
So so I guess the aim of the task team is to get people on board that are also decision makers, whether they're at a management level, just to kind of iron out those risks, identify risks, and kind of work on it together. So like you said earlier, it's the accountability, isn't it, and making sure it's like a team effort rather than just coming from above.
And they have, they need to be fully empowered. I think they are, and the ones that I can think of, need to let them get on a bit. But there was something else you said, which I just wanted to pick up on before we finish today, is about, you kind of want to, you've not sort of put it out into the business so far, you just kept it with the directors. You don't want to create as much certainty. One thing I can tell you, because I spent a lot of time in turnaround in my career, but also when I first left the corporate world. So I've been in businesses that are, like, if we don't sort this out, we're closing next week kind of scenarios. And one of the interesting things I learned in there was around this kind of, in those situations, you have no choice but to pull everyone together and go, this is the reality, and we have to sort this out together, otherwise we're dead. It's kind of, there's no time for, a big change process. It's kind of, this needs to happen. And in almost every single project I worked in, I never saw people run for the hills. So the fear of most leaders is if we tell people that things are not great and not good, that they will run and they'll leave and they'll panic. And actually, in my experience, what happens when you bring people in now, you've got to bring them in sensibly, and not, you don't necessarily want to show them all the warts, but be relatively transparent about the reality of our situation, the challenges that face us, and what we need to do. In my experience, people rally around and roll up their sleeves and help you. Most people don't run for the hills. So it's just a bit of insight there from my experience that might help you. I think hiding stuff from staff often doesn't get you what you want.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for the questions. Great. Okay, so we're kind of 2 o'clock now, and most people have hung on, so I appreciate that. So hopefully those questions were useful. It would be great to get some feedback post session, just so if there's anything you want to change for the next session, we can do that. But other than that, thank you again. We'll get all the materials out immediately, and speak to your coach, speak to me, and hopefully we can support each other over the coming weeks. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
Thanks. Got some questions here that only just dropped in.